If someone was to say to you, strategic workforce planning and flexible staffing, what runs through your head? Hopefully, the right answers, but for many, maybe a few confusing points. Here's a little bit about what we've got coming up in today's episode.
There are tech scale-ups that are scaling up and laying off within 18 months. But they promote a people-first culture, and they don't live by that. They just got great marketing. Looking at things like skill assessments or analysing the workforce of skills that you've already got. You don't necessarily need to be asking for more money or more time in any sense. You can be looking at alternative ways to see what we've got in-house and what can we do with that. Where can we develop people quite easily? What skills do we need for the future? Having more personable relationships with your stakeholders in terms of like going for a coffee or getting out of they don't just call you for the purpose of we need CVs or we spoke to this candidate. Actually building a relationship with them and giving them insights, giving them your opinion of the market, giving them your view on what's going on, and also finding out theirs. That I think is key for them having to them getting the belief in the talent acquisition space.
Sitting down with my business partner, Jodi Barrow, who is a specialist in both of these two topics, we break down exactly what strategic workforce planning is, how we can utilize it effectively as a leader in talent acquisition and as an individual contributor to consistently add value to the business. We then also explore in depth what flexible staffing actually means. And look, we focus specifically on freelancing. Yes, there's a high cost that's attributed to freelancers, but there's an added benefit behind them. And Jodi breaks this down in fantastic detail. It's one of those topics where I don't really feel you understand until you hear it yourself. There's still elements of freelancing that I'm still learning just through speaking and working closely with Jodi and her team. So hopefully there's some elements that you can take from this as well. And look, choose, you work with freelancers, you work with interim, you work with agencies, you work with embedded, whatever. There is a solution that is right at any point in a business's cycle. So it's about understanding what they are and being open for when the time is right. But thank you so much for joining on the episode, and hopefully you get as much out of it as we had when we filmed it. Thank you. Welcome to Tea Time with Talent Acquisition, the podcast aimed at fostering knowledge and sharing stories within the vibrant talent acquisition community. I'm your host, Eden, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be joined by returning guests of the podcast and my business partner, an experienced recruiter who has spent the past decade not only advancing her own career, but also deepening the knowledge of the organizations, hiring managers, specialists, and communities that she hires within. Her expertise particularly shines in the area of strategic workforce planning and flexible staffing. But what do we mean when we say workforce planning and flexible staffing? So in this episode, we're going to break this down. We're going to explore these concepts in depth. We're going to discuss how talent acquisition partner teams and individuals can leverage them along with other key strategies to consistently add value to the businesses that they support. So when you're ready, grab your favorite tea or coffee if you prefer, and join me in welcome today's guest, founding partner at Peritus Partners, Jodi Barrow. So thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, and congratulations on such a exciting platform, especially since the last time I was on.
Well, I say the fact that we're still here is quite a nice idea. You're a returning guest for a reason. It means that people are listening, which is good. But I appreciate, like I said, you joining, and this time focusing on strategic workforce planning. But we'll get into that in a moment. But before we do, I am curious to give you the teaser question. So, from your perspective, Jodi, what makes a high-performing talent acquisition team?
Oh, well, I guess high performing, it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're a candidate in the market, you probably just want to be called back. But generally, I think it's someone that's persistent, that's positive, and that is personable with candidates. I think that makes a difference.
So when you bring it out to a team, though, say you had 3 or 4 of those people in one team, does that make it a high-performing team, or does that make it a high-performing individual in a team?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think there's actually lots of platforms these days where people are more encouraged to collaborate and work together. But I definitely think having touch points, having relationships internally, treating each other like stakeholders, and fostering a kind of a partnership with them, particularly if you're kind of, I mean, we had it in the past where we're kind of, well, we have it now where we're working on sort of contract and permanent recruiting, working together in that sense and sharing our network and being able to do what's best for the business as opposed to not what's just best for you.
Like that, what's best for the business, and being mindful of you're a team inside the business, which I guess is a nice segue into workforce or strategic workforce planning, because it is around what is best for the business, I guess. So explain to anyone who's listening, who's maybe not heard the term before, or maybe has heard of it in passing, but doesn't really understand what it is. What does it mean, the phrase workforce planning?
Sure. Well, I guess as a intro, a strategic workforce plan is essentially where the business comes together to create a plan for the workforce. So pretty much what it says on the tin. A good strategic workforce planning, in my opinion, is where finance, HR, and strategy, whether that be hiring manager, the product manager, the CEO, whoever's from the kind of business side, come together in equal parts to create a plan for the business. Ideally, that it's underlined with data, and each department has valuable and accurate data to be able to contribute. But in the best way, they are establishing processes and workflows, and clear responsibilities of each department and each person's responsibilities to work and collaborate together to create a plan that's not only implemented but is implemented throughout the company, not just at kind of senior level. It's definitely something that's long-term thinking for businesses.
There's that triad of elements of the business coming together for the betterment of where's the business going and how do we ultimately collectively get there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why then? My good old question to anyone is why should we pay attention to this? Why is it even important to be aware of this? Like, what's the reasons behind, why this is important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually more important now, probably more than ever. We've seen such a rocky ride, especially in talent acquisition, in recruitment, where these peaks and troughs of hiring are coming and going. And I mean, generally, I guess the normal kind of benefits, if you like, of why somebody should or why a business should have a strategic workforce plan is because it helps them to stay ahead of competition. It helps them to spot opportunities. It can improve culture and help individuals grow generally. But also, one of the things that we've seen consistently, unfortunately, is that it can prevent risk, and it can also be a method or can act as a tool which can allow us to be more agile and pivot if we need to. Especially in the kind of world we live in, where there's staff fluctuations naturally in our market in the tech scene, but also with kind of high turnover rates of people leaving inside of 18 months, 2 years of being in a permanent role. But in other industries, things like retirement, where the workforce is aging and they've not got people to kind of fill those gaps. But then also outside threats, like we've seen with pandemics and unfortunate wars. There's a portion of our workforce which is out of our control to a certain degree. But it's kind of a good strategic workforce would factor that in to ensure that we're prepared as possible.
I'm curious to kind of break it obviously down into where our listeners would sit, which is talent acquisition function in a second, and kind of see how we can bring in our part of the triad, as it were, for this topic. But before we do that, who should be the main driver of this? Yes, there's 3 pillars into it, but workforce plan, where should it be really stemming from your opinion?
Well, naturally, you're going to have the business side or the strategy side that's going to have, and it depends on the use case. It could be something that's say it's like a CRM integration, then you might have or an integration of some kind. You might have the business product manager. You also might have the tech expert. So it really does depend case by case on what you're actually changing. If it's the whole company strategy, then of course there'll be some C-level, normally a CEO, for example, plus the head of talent acquisition or talent acquisition leaders, along with, say, a CFO. If it's at that level, it really depends on what the topic is, with how critical the people may be to that project. So I guess it's kind of, you want somebody that's got the direction of where we're going, and what are we going with. Typically, I mean, in these days, that should definitely be speared by or steered by customers and what the customers want of your product or service. Then you want someone from financing or a budget holder involved that's going to be able to, make sure that there's money on the table to play with. And then somebody responsible for staffing in some way or another.
Do you think it's fair to say then, if someone's listening to this and they're in a leading position in the talent function, the people function, and this conversation hasn't been happening, or at least it's not happening with their involvement, they need to be voicing this sooner rather than later, right?
Yeah, I think at least what I see a lot of is that they are involved up to a certain point, and this is why, for me, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to come on here and talk about this topic, is because we see so often, particularly in the markets that we work, there are tech scale-ups that are scaling up and laying off within 18 months. But they promote a people first culture, and they don't live by that. They're just got great marketing. And that is something that can be avoided. We shouldn't be onboarding and upskilling a ton of people in talent acquisition to then let them go. So that's just in talent acquisition alone. That's without the rest of the organization. And so, I think that that's the kind of problem that I want to highlight to people, and potentially suggest even just some kind of question marks of ways that can be resolved.
So let's dive into it. Give me one. Give me the. Let's say I'm listening. What's one of the things you would suggest I start doing?
Well, I think what's most important from a talent acquisition perspective is that they show their value to the business. Because typically it is business and finance that kind of work together, come up with these plans, and oh, by the way, talent acquisition, we need X amount of people. This is the budget we've got to do it. Off you go, kind of thing. They're not having a seat at the table. And I think, I mean, some of the things that you could do is proactively show your value to the business. Looking at things like skill assessments or analysing the workforce of skills that you've already got. You don't necessarily need to be asking for more money or more time in any sense. You can be looking at alternative ways to see what we've got in-house and what can we do with that. Where can we develop people quite easily? What skills do we need for the future? Kind of understanding what you've got to work with, but then also giving some input on what could be needed for the future. For example, what are our competition hiring? Obviously, AI is a big topic right now. It's kind of looking at, say, for example, we've got a ton of data engineers, but they don't have a lot of Gen AI skills in-house. However, that's something we're going to need to become more competitive. In which case, how do we identify those skills? Can we bring in some training that can help upskill our existing workforce, or can we look at alternative outside models if it's not needed as a fixed cost full time forever?
How would I go about analysing what my competition's doing?
So part of that would be on the business strategy side. So that could be, I mean, a lot of what businesses are looking at now is having or have been through UX transformations or customer experience transformations, where they're trying to understand what their user of their service or product really wants. They're trying to bring that into the business strategy to then give them more of that, give the people what they want. But it can also be, as a talent acquisition person, you're speaking to candidates. You're speaking to candidates that are interviewing at other places. You're learning just by speaking to them. You hear what they want, what industries they want to work in, what technologies they want to work with. You're finding all of this information out, what kind of salaries they're asking for, what cities they want to live in. It might not seem, if you're based in a certain location working on site full time, it might not seem something interesting for you at that point. But if you're hearing it consistently over time, then there may be a reason for that. It might be that, that's becoming a digital hub, in which case when those conversations do take place, or even proactively, you can be suggesting and exploring that topic with your business partners. One thing I do see actually a lot of the times, where, and often it's down to the pressure and time frames of having to ramp up so fast, both in talent acquisition teams and in the hires that they're having to make, is they kind of lose a bit of credibility by hiring, juniors that have come from scheduling into recruitment roles, which there's by no means nothing wrong with that. But they're lacking the investment in training and letting them loose with business stakeholders. So hiring managers are working with junior recruiters that are still trying to learn on the job, and then they're kind of losing a bit of trust and belief in that talent acquisition, which is then not making that the go-to unit for insights, information on these topics, which they're gathering naturally every day.
I see this not from the junior perspective, but as you just said there, I've definitely come across larger entities, I'm not going to say the names in case they're listening, that have internal talent acquisition teams that they just completely bypass, and they don't have the interest in working with them, and I'd rather go to external, which is mental. We are external. We are.
I was going to say, yeah.
All right, bear with me.
No,
and I can see your eyes, but like we're there to provide value, and if we can't provide the value, then we're not able to do our job properly. But there needs to be. I think teams need to recognise there's methods out there, and it shouldn't just go straight to this one. You have to go through. And this is part of this is targeting the internal teams and saying, look, if you add value, then you can obviously help your business save money in the long run. Anyways, you're talking about identifying trends. You're speaking to candidates, right? You're identifying the trends, and there's various methods. I guess you said locations. One thing that sparked when you were saying that was project. So my thought process was, I'm working for company A, and my competitor, I could in theory go and try and target their employees. There's a double-edged sword. Of course, we want people from our competitors, but we could also be proactively asking them insight questions about their projects to better arm ourselves with, okay, what's actually happening? How far through the projects are they? And things like that. Then I guess feed that back into the business as well, right?
Yeah, it's kind of taking, instead of discarding the information that you're hearing, especially when you're hearing it repetitively from different people, that is a sign that there is a trend going on, and it's kind of having that space in your talent acquisition team to be picking up on those trends and to be discussing them and to see if there is any substance behind it. In sort of addition to that, I think there is also I guess a way that talent acquisition can really bring value to the business is not just kind of hearing out and waiting to see if they hear something that's going to be actionable, but also proactively going out and trying to get that data, trying to get that information, because sometimes it's not always looking harder or like paying more to get the candidate that you need. Sometimes there are other strategies like skill-based hiring, which I think you've had people on the pod actually talking about in the past. So there's various different ways that you can bring value to the business, and that is just I guess one example.
So let's say I've gathered this information, whatever means it is, and I want to bring this back to the business, because you obviously talk about it as selling back to the business. When we discussed it internally, you want to sell back to the company, you want to treat your stakeholders as what they are, stakeholders. How could I do that in an effective way? I'll give you an example, right? Say I'm hearing that Poland, Krakow is a hotspot for talent, right? It keeps popping up, it keeps coming up. How can I take that information in the tech stack that we're hiring for back to my stakeholders in a packaged up way, as it were?
I think you would need to definitely have some data to back it up. I also think relationships. So having stakeholder relationships is important. And this, you don't need to be a head of talent acquisition to foster this. It should be at all levels, because I think for me at least, what I see the lack of at the moment is between businesses or the business side and hiring managers having belief in their talent acquisition system. So it's kind of connecting those dots at every level, and it could be even just having a coffee with somebody and voicing that. Or if you've got a particularly hard role, have you noticed that, I've spoken to X amount of people, these are the salaries that I'm seeing for that role, therefore suggesting maybe skill-based hiring. What if we looked at these sets of skills which can develop into that at the budget that we've got or at the location that we have? Obviously it's very dependent, depending on what that company has to offer today versus what they can offer in the future. There does become a certain point where obviously you don't have the means to set up an office in Poland if you've just started in the first year, and that's not in your scope of responsibility. So you kind of have to be realistic. But I definitely think voicing it and showing with data and giving your opinion, which I think is not done enough by internal recruiters. They're not giving their opinions to stakeholders enough to really get them to see them as a consultant. And coming back to your point on selling, that is exactly what it is, because to get them to believe in your department, you need to be able to show them your value. If you're treated like a separate department, you need to show them, this is what we specialize in, this is how we work, and you also need to learn their ways of working too. So yeah.
I find, and slightly off topic but on topic at the same point, I find that there's too many hats that talent acquisition are wearing, far too many hats. And some teams do it brilliantly, where you have a recruiter, a scheduler, then someone else is managing the contracts at the end, and it gets a little bit muddled, and there's too many people in one pot. Then you have on the opposite side, you've got somebody who does employer branding, direct outreach, obviously all the internal process, and they don't have enough time to do everything effectively. So I feel like there's no sweet spot, or at least I'm not seeing the sweet spot personally. It's either you've got too few people, too many hats, and no one really knows what they're specializing in. Because I come back to your point of like, we are specialists. If you're a specialist in marketing and internal recruitment, and you're doing all the processes and you're doing all the contracts, you're going to drop the ball somewhere. It's inevitable, right?
Yeah, but actually it ties in with strategic workforce planning as well, because if you're able to, I mean, also it depends on the size of the business, right? If the size of the business is, they don't have huge hiring targets for this year, then perhaps you don't need to necessarily hire in talent acquisition. However, you might need to have a plan B in case something happens, and there is a huge backfill opportunity for people to be replaced. There could be a senior leader leave, and then the whole team goes out, and all of a sudden you're trying to focus on employer branding, and you need that extra support. So workforce planning is looking at what the risks are, so what you've got at the moment, analysing that and coming up with opportunities and threats on that, and then looking at externally what percentage of our workforce could be a more flexible workforce, for example. And that could be in talent acquisition, whether it's using agencies, gentle plug, no, using agencies like us, or embedded solutions, or even consultancies, freelancers, etc. Or whether it's in the business side, whether it's a case of we don't need to scale our recruitment team in any way, because we know we're not making considerable hires this year. However, we might need to have somebody on hand to staff our IT team or our marketing team, depending what is needed. But I think it's having those relationships and fostering those relationships for when there is a inevitable problem again in the future, because that quality and speed of ramping up is not always there in juniors, and it's not fair to put juniors in that situation. So I think
that's why we end up having a as I say, that's why you have the revolving door of people coming in, coming out at a lower level, and then they just bounce between projects until they think, well, no, I don't want to do recruit anymore. Just burn out after that.
And I also think, there is also this doesn't apply to everybody. There are some companies that are, really doing this quite well, and talent acquisition is very well respected, and they also have a backup of plan Bs if they need it. So this isn't for everyone, but it is something that I am seeing is lacking in a lot of scale ups, because typically they're driven by making X amount of headcount for the next round of funding, and then having to scale back at short notice and making layoffs, when actually, even if you looked at the cost over that period of time, you would have been better off having contractors for 12 months. When you factor in sort of national insurance benefits, even onboarding, offboarding costs, plus salaries, and the reputation, there's definitely, I think, even a lot of the consultancies are considering, or are having a portion of their workforce as more flexible, to allow for the fluctuations in the market and in this world that we live in today.
Let's talk about flexible workforce. So the vast majority of businesses, in your opinion, hire contract or perm?
Well, there's always going to be more permanent than contract. However, it really depends on the size of the business. I think a lot more enterprise businesses are using more volume of contractors or freelancers naturally. But I guess flexible workforce could mean different things. It doesn't necessarily need to be freelancers. It can be ANU or AUG workers, as I mentioned before, embedded solutions or consultancies. Sometimes people have a project coming up and they outsource, which is also sometimes time and cost more time and cost efficient than building their own team of people in-house. So it's kind of making yourself aware of what solutions are out there and what are the benefits of those solutions versus, like almost like a pros and cons list between what you can do today and what is out there and available today.
Briefly then, because I do want to go through some of them, because I think saying flexible workforce, saying ANU, AUG, contract, I think every time someone says flexible workforce or freelance, their immediate mindset is a super expensive contractor that's going to be here for 3 months or 6 months and leave. That seems to always be the way, right? But obviously you head up our flexible workforce side of the business, so you have a much closer understanding of what this is. So break down what the different methods are around it, and then when you might decide to use that type of model.
Yeah, I guess if we're to kind of go into freelancers a bit deeper, so there's no shying away from a seasoned freelance daily rate is not cheap. And they're not cheap for good reason, because they are taking on the risk of their contract coming to an end quite abruptly. Often it's got 4 week notice period, which makes them flexible. But also for that person, they don't have the security of having a permanent, never-ending job. So they take on that risk. So that's obviously has to come at a cost somewhere. They also don't have any of the benefits of a employee. So you don't have holiday entitlement. You don't get all of the fancy benefits that we see in today's packages. So where freelancers are not having that, that's factored into their daily rate. In addition to that, they are going into different businesses, seeing different environments and seeing what works, what doesn't on a much faster scale than somebody that's employed. If you're employed for 2 years in the same business, you can definitely have an impact during that time. However, if you've done 2 or 3 freelance projects in that time, you might have worked in a startup where you built something from 0 to 1. You might have then gone to an enterprise client that's moving a legacy migration. You might even then work in a scale up that's scaling super fast or hyper growth phase. They are able to bring the knowledge of all of those environments, different technologies. They're typically able to work with a bit broader technologies as well, and bring that to not only to your project but also to your team. So in terms of if you're analyzing your workforce and looking at, right, we know that AI is going to be something that we're going to need in our data department in the future, or we don't have it today, for example, actually training and development can be through a freelancer. You can bring in an expert that can come in and consult. It doesn't even need to be full time. But it's useful not only for the business, but also for the team that's working there. They're upskilling and learning off this person. And they're also able to, more often than not, they feel like they're being developed. They like the job. They're working around people that are motivating them. So even their tendency to stay with the business is longer. So there's tons of benefits of why a freelancer is expensive. I'm not going to dance around the topic. They are expensive. However, it then also depends on how the cost looks, because if you're say, for example, you're working on a migration that's temporarily out of use, or part of it's out of use for your customers, or we're kind of coming up to Black Friday. If your platform is freezing or there's bugs in it, and a freelancer comes in and unblocks that problem, at what cost are you saving? At what money, or if you're looking at money or time, depending how you're kind of measuring cost, what are you saving from that freelancer being there? Because actually it might not even be a cost. I think people just see some high daily rates and think, whoa, but actually it could even be a cost saving.
I love that point, by the way, because I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think going back down to TAs, and please, if someone wildly disagrees with me, message me. I would like to have the conversation further about it. But we see the cost and you go, like it's 900 a day and I'm looking for someone who's permanent and it's not going to work. But then you're not thinking, okay, the Black Friday thing is an exact example. Straight after Black Friday, we've got Christmas. We've got the busiest period for e-commerce that's about to happen. And obviously a prime example, do you need that person for a year? Could someone come in for 6 months? Then you factor in, okay, is it really going to save the business money? And then as TAs, we could come back to what you said earlier, take what you've learned, take the knowledge you've gathered, and you could sell that back and you could say, look, we've got option 1, which is this person on a permanent contract, blah, blah, or we got option 2, and you can then, you're more of a consultant back to your business.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is also with we see it all the time, especially I guess it's the time when companies come out to agencies when they've got a position that's open for forever. And they're trying to find that needle in a haystack. More often than not, it is a discussion between us and the hiring manager to identify what their pain points are, what do they really need, and where's the room for negotiation. That combined with obviously a thorough search is normally where we land in getting them the hire. So there's an element of, I guess, looking in-house, looking at what you've got, looking what you can change and adapt, and be more flexible on. But then also, what is going to help us grow? What is going to save us time? What is going to save us money? And what are the trade-offs? I think that conversation happens a lot more on the tech side with like vendors, what cloud provider are we going to use? What technology are we going to use?
Mm-hmm.
That is such a deep and meaningful discussion between cost, time, purpose, benefit. We don't necessarily have that same conversation happening in the talent acquisition team around staffing models.
Yeah. I mean, I can't add anything else, unfortunately. I wish I could. You just summarized it. But it's absolutely right. It's the amount of times we listen to, and this isn't to start throwing shade at, because sometimes people don't know any better. Oh, we've never worked with agencies before. Why? We just never have. We always do hiring internally. Or we've never hired a freelancer. We won't hire a freelancer. But what's the discussion? If you're so close to that model or to that option, do you understand why, or is it just historical? Most of the time, it is genuinely, I find, historical. Or until a pain is so badly needed that then you do it and you push out, but then you've pissed off half the agencies out there because, for whatever reason, it was just a rudeness comment come back down to them.
There is also good reason for wanting permanent staff. Like if you're building a long-term culture and you want the stability in the business, one of the reasons I often hear actually is that we want the knowledge in-house. And that's fine. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that you can't utilize the purpose of a freelancer ever for that project. It means that having a balance of the two is normally more beneficial for the whole organization. But yeah, it's definitely there. Even if you are looking to grow and develop a core foundation team, which there is still a period of time where contractors or freelancers or even agencies and consultancies can benefit your product, service, or team.
And we've definitely seen it a few times. And please don't get me wrong, because you do this a lot more than me. But I've definitely seen it where the cost or the budget associated to hiring interim freelance is different when you're hiring a permanent employee. I've got a business right now where you cannot hire this person in their core location to Germany. We can only hire them on a B2B contract as a contractor. It's a different budget. It's a different cost, which means that they can work with an agency on. You're nodding.
Yeah.
So if anyone's listening and not watching the video, you're nodding. So I'm not talking absolute crap there.
Yeah, this is to do with CapEx and OpEx budgeting. So more often than not, you'll have like your headcount, which is a fixed cost. So it goes in as something that we're going to carry throughout the year. And then you've got your more flexible or project based cost, which is things like, a temporary license that you might need for a period of time, or I guess things that are not going to be forever. They might just be for a period of time. And freelancers would fall under that budget in most cases, versus headcount. So that's the other thing as well. I guess in some organizations, in a lot of organizations, headcount and freelancers are not always dealt with by the same people. But actually, if for example the budget is sitting with the hiring manager, and the headcount is sitting with the talent acquisition, then them two stakeholders, or them two departments are actually collaborating and having this discussion, having this open discussion is more important than ever. Because also, on the flip side of that, it might be that your hiring manager's got a freelancer that's done such a good job in ramping up this project and getting it to a point where it's functioning now. We don't necessarily need somebody of a freelancer level or expertise. We could actually phase them out, and we could save some money now by flipping it the other way and reducing our daily rate and bringing in a permanent person, because we now know that this is a stable product, which is we're going to need somebody to monitor it for however, for the foreseeable. So it's actually having it both ways, having that discussion both ways can benefit at the end of the day. That's the purpose of the workforce planning is to make sure you're getting a plan together that's right for the business and meeting the business needs in terms of the people, the finances, and the obviously the direction.
Nice. I've got one final question for you. A bit more
Hit
of a
me.
hypothetical scenario, because a lot of the listeners we get are aspiring leaders in TA or people who are kind of on that individual contribution level. There's definitely a lot that they can be able to take away, and hopefully they've been gathering their notepads, scribbling down, especially the part who's just sharing about how freelancers are working and the different ways that we can bring the value in. But what would you suggest that they can do immediately to start moving the needle towards strategic workforce planning? Because there's a whole host of things inside this podcast that takes time, and it takes multiple conversations back and forth, and it's not all going to happen overnight. So what can we do to start that process?
I think firstly check in with your superiors to find out is there something in place, and what does it look like. Just asking that question, having that awareness would be useful to see what your next step should be. But outside of that, and I think this would be beneficial for a workforce plan or not, but having more personable relationships with your stakeholders, and I don't necessarily mean dating them. I mean in terms of like going for a coffee or getting out of. They don't just call you for the purpose of we need CVs or we spoke to this candidate. Actually building a relationship with them and giving them insights, giving them your opinion of the market, giving them your view on what's going on, and also finding out theirs. That I think is key for them having to them getting the belief in the talent acquisition space. And if you're literally sitting there thinking, well, I don't know what's going on in the market, I'm confused, there's layoffs, there's this, there's that, someone's telling me this, someone's telling me that, if you generally haven't been able to track any trends at the moment, ask them what they think of the market, ask them what they would like to know from you, how can I add value to you, and then kind of take things from there. But I think and also you can also contact the people that you've hired or your colleagues that you're working with as interviewers even, and ask them what do they want, what do they see themselves doing in the next few years, how do they see the business now if they've been there for X amount of time. Although it's not necessarily an official like HR review or anything like that, it'll still give you some insights to spark some inspiration on how you can what topics to bring to the business for conversation.
I think that kind of stems into the intelligent questions part. It's just being inquisitive, being naturally inquisitive, and trying just to probe deeper, and it not just speeding through your calls, trying to get the bare minimum that you need to, but taking that time to really understand, okay, and that part you said there about the value, absolutely perfect. But what can you learn from them, either directly asking or just indirectly by being smart with your questioning. Jodi, it's a pleasure as always, so thank you so much for rejoining and for sharing the topic. If someone wants to take this conversation further with you, what's the best place to find you?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. You can. I'm probably tagged in one of Eden's posts somewhere along the line. The yin to my yang.
Wow.
I'm sure you'll find me on LinkedIn.
You push LinkedIn, but not our personal website.
You can always find us on the website, which was fantastically designed by Eden and our very own Victoria.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, nice little plug on that. But no, seriously, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.